I'd been hearing the hum for 15 years before I knew it had a name. I called it tinnitus. The Navy doctor I saw back in '04 called it tinnitus too. Said I'd worked the engine room of a cutter for 10 years, and what did I expect? He'd handed me a slip of paper with the names of 2 specialists on it, and I'd folded the slip into my wallet and never gone. The hum wasn't loud. It was company. It was on the same low note for hours at a stretch, and then it would rise a half step, drop back, settle. After a while you stop hearing a thing that's always there. After 15 years you can't remember what silence sounds like, and you stop trying. My wife used to say I was a quiet man. Etta meant it as a compliment, mostly. We'd be at the kitchen table on a winter morning, and she'd be reading the colony bulletin out loud. A list of grievances about water rationing, a wedding announcement, a job posting at the foundry. And I'd nod and pour her coffee and not say much. And she'd reach across and put her hand on mine and say, "There you are." Like I might have wandered off otherwise. After she died, I kept the habit of pouring 2 cups for a while. Then 1. Then I stopped using the kitchen at all. Most of my eating happens on the barge now. The barge is called the Holcomb. I named her after my father, who hauled grain on a river barge back on Earth long before he ever saw a star. I bought her at auction 9 years ago, when I came off the long-haul runs and took up the Draylen Loop instead. 41 days from start to start, 4 colony worlds, 11 mining stations, 3 drop anchorages where you sit and wait for someone to come collect their crate. The loop pays the worst of any route this side of the rim. You take it because you like to be alone, or because nobody else will, or because your wife is dead and your house is empty, and the kitchen table reminds you of an arm that isn't there anymore. The reasons add up. The hum had been steady all those years. It had started in the spring when I was 52 and Etta was 50. And we were arguing about whether to fix the irrigation pump or replace it. And one afternoon I heard a note in the back of my head and asked her if she'd left the radio on. She said no, and I asked if the pump was making a sound, and she said no, and I stopped asking. I went to the doctor a week later. He said tinnitus. I went home and didn't think about it again for a long time. 3 weeks after that, Etta found a lump under her arm. And the hum stopped being something to think about, because there was suddenly a great deal else to think about. And you only have so much room. She lived 4 more years after the diagnosis. Long enough to see the colony's 3rd foundry go up, and the new church built, and our grandson born. The cancer took her in pieces. The hum kept on. By the time I was burying her, I had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing the weight of a wedding ring. It was just there. I would have said if anyone had asked that it was hers somehow, that it was the part of her my body had decided to keep. I told nobody that. I am not a man who says things like that out loud. I worked the loop for 9 years with the hum in my head, and I was 67 the spring it ended. The contract came in on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesday is when the Draylen Dispatch Board updates, and I'd been killing time at the freight office on Marinville, waiting on a loadout for an outpost called Yelsevek that nobody much cares about. The dispatcher there is a woman named Petra, a wide, quiet person with a long braid and a way of looking at you that reminds me of my mother. She came over with a paper slip and laid it on the counter next to my coffee. "Private contract," she said. "Came in directly. They asked for you." By name. I picked up the slip. It was light. Cryo crate 1 unit. Pick up at a private hangar on Marinville, a building I'd passed 100 times and never looked at. Destination: Vorontor, on the outer ring of the Draylen Loop, which is to say the place where the route bends back on itself. 43,000 credits. 3 times the standard rate. I read it twice. They say what it is? They didn't. Live cargo? Slip says non-perishable medical. What's it weigh? 230 kilos with the crate. And they wouldn't say. I looked at her. She held my eyes for a long second. She had taken contracts off me for 9 years and had never given me one without telling me what it was. There was no warning in her face, only a kind of quiet steadiness, like she was watching to see what I'd do. 43,000, I said. 43,000. I signed the slip. I will tell you that I knew, the moment I walked into the private hangar, that the cargo was not non-perishable medical. The hangar smelled like ozone and warm scale. The crate sat in the middle of the floor on a wheeled cradle, 4 by 4 feet, plain steel, no markings. 2 attendants stood near it in long coats. They didn't look at me when I came in. They looked at the crate. The crate was humming. Not the way cryo units hum, which is a clean low rumble from the coolers. This was a different sound, something deeper with a shape to it. A pattern. I stood in the hangar door with my loop manifest in my hand and listened, and the hum in my head, the one I'd carried for 15 years, shifted half a step up and settled into the same note as the crate. I almost dropped the manifest. The 2 attendants finally turned. The taller one came over. He was a thin man with a long jaw and quiet hands. He didn't introduce himself. "Mr. Ashcraft, that's me, your route." I gave him the loop schedule. He looked at it without reading it, the way a man looks at a thing he already knows. You're being paid for discretion as much as for the haul. You understand that? I understand it. You won't open the crate. I never open crates I'm not paid to open. Anyone asks what you've got non-perishable medical. That's what the slip says. Anyone presses, they won't. He looked at me for a long moment. I am not a sentimental man, and I am not in the habit of being studied. I stood my ground and held his eye, and let him take whatever measure he wanted. Whatever he saw, it satisfied him. He nodded once. You'll be paid in full on delivery. Alright, there will be interest in this crate along the route. From parties without standing. You understand, I understand. If they identify themselves as Drekken or as Corinth, you say the cargo is sealed under private contract and you have no authority to release it. You give nothing else. Corinth, I said. The word sat odd in my mouth. You won't hear it. You won't repeat it. If they board, you don't resist. You stand aside. You let them take what they came for, and you walk away and you tell no one. Are we clear? We're clear. He held my eye another beat. Then he turned and walked off, and the attendants moved the cradle out toward the Holcomb's Bay ramp. And that was how I came to carry the Empress's daughter across the rim and back without ever opening the box she was in. I'll tell you about the run, then, because it was the strangest peaceful 3 weeks of my life. The Holcomb is 41 years old, built for a one-man crew with a cargo bay that runs the length of her hull, and a cockpit you sit in like a chair. There's a galley that's really just a hot plate and a kettle, a bunk that folds down out of the wall, a head with a recycler that complains all winter, and a small porthole over the bunk where you can see the stars going by if you sit up at the right angle. She is not a beautiful ship. She is a working ship. She runs on a sublight that I have rebuilt twice and a quantum hop drive that I leave to the loop's engineers, because I am too old to learn its tantrums. I have made the same trip more than 200 times. The route is a long shallow oval that takes me past 4 worlds and 11 outposts and 3 anchorages. And on any normal run I sleep in the bunk and eat from the galley, and listen to old radio recordings from Edda's collection. She liked the Earth, archive jazz, the bands with horns, and I check the autopilot at the appointed hours and I look out the porthole at nothing in particular, and I think. On this run I slept in the cargo bay. I won't tell you it was a conscious choice. The first night out from Marinville I had been working in the bay, lashing down a stack of agricultural seed I'd picked up on the way to the private hangar. And I sat down on the deck plate next to the crate to drink my coffee, and I didn't get up. The bay was warm. The crate's coolers were running hot to compensate for something, and the deck plate beneath the cradle had warmed up to the temperature of a stove just turning off. It was the warmest place I'd been all winter. I leaned my back against the crate's wheeled cradle and drank my coffee and listened to the hum. The hum in the crate and the hum in my head had settled into the same note now. They weren't humming with each other so much as they were one hum, in 2 places. The way a tuning fork rings against a piano string. I sat with my coffee and listened and didn't think about it, because there was nothing to think. Whatever the crate was carrying, it was making the sound I'd been hearing for 15 years. I would deliver it to Vorontor, and the sound would stop, and that would be that. And I would have made 43,000 credits. And I would go back to running rice and machine parts and outpost mail. Edda would have called it Providence. I called it Tuesday. I slept on the deck plate that night, with my coat folded under my head, and the hum running through me like a low tide. When I woke up at the first ship's bell, I was rested in a way I hadn't been in 3 years. I slept on the deck plate every night after that. I want to be honest about what I felt. It wasn't peace exactly. It wasn't joy. It was the feeling you have when you walk into a kitchen and somebody's there cooking. The presence of another body in a room you are used to being alone in. I would lie down at night with the crate's cradle a foot from my head and the hum running through us both, and I would feel accompanied, as if someone were in the bay with me. I did not name the feeling. I did not investigate it. I am 67 years old, and a man who has buried a wife. And you learn at my age to take comfort where you find it, and not ask after its provenance. By the 8th day on the loop I was running ahead of schedule. I'd hopped from Marinville out to Threll's station, the first mining outpost on the run, and dropped off their water filters and the seed I'd loaded. The station foreman is a man named Olin who's been there longer than I have been on the loop, and he came down to the bay to inspect the seed himself, the way he always does. And I leaned in the hatch and drank his bad coffee and watched him work. He looked up at the cradle in the back of my bay. What's that one? Private contract. He looked at it a while longer. He's a careful man, he doesn't ask twice. You sleeping out here, Moss? I looked down at my coat, which was folded against the cradle's wheel, and at the imprint of my body on the deck plate, and I shrugged. It's warmer in the bay this run. He nodded slowly. He didn't say anything. He finished his inspection and signed off and clapped me on the shoulder. On his way out, and I sealed the bay and we lifted off and went on to the next stop. It was on the 12th day between Yell and the second anchorage that the comms board lit up with something that was not a Drayland dispatch. I was at the cockpit chair when it came in. I'd just finished my breakfast, a tin of beans heated on the hot plate, a flatbread, black coffee, and was running the morning checks. The comm board had been quiet for 3 days. Then a hard tone came through and held. I looked at it. The Drayland dispatch tones I know by ear. Olin's hailing tone. Petra's flat call. The auto-acknowledge from each station. This was none of those. It was a clean overlapping pair of notes. Deeper than any human comms array uses. And it rode through my cockpit speakers with a weight I felt in my teeth. I leaned forward and opened the channel. This is the Holcomb. State your identification. The voice that came back was not human. I want to be plain about that. It was not human in the way a recorded voice is not human. Too clean, too even. It was not human in the way a voice from a long, larger throat is not human. With a register that ran from somewhere below my hearing up into the audible range and back down. I heard it as words but not entirely as words. I understood it the way you understand a dog's bark for what it means. You carry a sealed crate on this route. I do. You will turn the crate over to us. We are sending coordinates. I looked at my coffee on the panel. I looked at the comm board. I drew a long, slow breath and let it out through my nose. I have been told, by Edda mostly and by Olin, and by a foreman at the Marinville loading dock years ago, that I am stubborn in a way that has no virtue to it. It is just a thing I am. I do not become angry, I become slow. This is a private contract under Drayland Registry, I said. The cargo is sealed. I have no authority to release it. A long pause. The hum in my head, the one in the bay too, held at its note. I heard it the way you hear the room around your own breathing. You will turn the crate over. I have no authority to release it. We will board. You'll find paperwork that says the same thing my mouth says. I have no authority to release it. If you board, I'll stand aside and you can take what you came for, and then you and I will both have a problem with the people who hired me. There was another long pause. I picked up my coffee and drank. When the voice came back, it was a different voice. Older, slower. A great deal more careful. Pilot, repeat your identification. Mawson Ashcraft, the Holcomb. Drayland Loop, Ashcraft, yes. You have been on this route a long time, 9 years. A pause. Hum the tone in your head, pilot, the one you carry. I sat very still. I am 67 years old. I have flown 26 years of cargo runs across a dozen systems, and met every kind of person who lives in this rim. And I have never been asked on an open comm channel by an unidentified caller to hum the sound in my head. I sat with my coffee cooling and the cockpit silent around me, and I thought about that for what felt like a long time and was probably 6 seconds. Then I hummed it. It is not a long phrase. It rises a half step, dips back, holds the longer note and resolves down. It runs maybe 10 seconds end to end. I had carried it for 15 years and I had never sung it out loud. Not even into the dark of the bunk on bad nights. And now I sang it into a comm channel for a voice I did not know. There was a silence on the other end so long that I thought the channel had dropped. Then the voice said, very quietly, in something close to my own language, "Carry on, Pilot Ashcraft. The crate will not be interfered with again on this route. Our apologies for the disturbance." The channel closed. I sat in the cockpit chair for a long time. I finished my coffee. I made another one. I checked the long range and saw 2 signals peeling away from my course at a hard angle. Both of them larger than any ship I'd ever crossed paths with on the loop. They left a wake on the scope for nearly an hour. I watched it fade. Then I got up and went back to the cargo bay and lay down next to the cradle and put my hand flat on the side of the crate. The hum was still there. Steady, holding its note. I lay with my hand on the metal and I thought about Edda and the kitchen table and the way she'd put her hand on mine. There you are. I shut my eyes. I'll tell you what I thought in the days after. I thought it was a piece of cargo I was hauling that had nothing to do with me. I thought somebody important had wanted it carried discreetly, and somebody else important had wanted it intercepted. And I had been in the middle by accident because Petra had pulled my name off a list. The hum in my head was tinnitus, and the hum in the crate was a cooler vibration, and they had happened to match because the universe is full of coincidences that mean nothing. The voice on the comm had asked me to hum, because they wanted to confirm I was the right pilot, and they had peeled off because my pilot's ID had checked out. That was the explanation that made sense. I held that explanation for the rest of the run, the way a man holds the rope on a ship he doesn't entirely trust. I held it because I needed to. Because any other explanation would mean that the hum in my head had been a person, and I was not ready to think about that yet. The Holcomb made Vorontor on the 26th day. Vorontor is a port at the outer bend of the loop, on a small dry world with 1 settlement and 3 landing pads. The dockmaster's office is a sheet metal building with a wind chime by the door that has been hanging there for as long as anyone remembers, and on calm days you can hear it from the pad. There was no wind that day. The chime hung still. The dockmaster who came out of the office was not the dockmaster I'd seen on every previous run. The man I knew was a heavyset vel named Jaro who chewed leaf and signed slips with a flourish. This person was tall and thin, with a long jaw and quiet hands, skin that I would not have called skin if I had been pressed on it. Hide maybe, worn dark hide, like an old saddle. They wore a long coat and a hood, and they did not look at me when they came down the pad ramp toward me. I stood at the bay hatch with my manifest in my hand. "You have a crate," they said. "I do, it is for us." Identification. They held out a slip. It was a one-line authorization with a sigil on it I had not seen before. I read the sigil and I read the line and I read it twice. The sigil was a coiled shape, scaled, the head turned in toward its own body. The line said only, "Receive on behalf of the throne." I gave them the crate. They wheeled it down the ramp themselves. They did not ask for help. They did not look at me. When the cradle was clear of my bay, they paused for a moment and lowered their hood, and I saw the face under it for the first time. It was not a human face. The jaw was longer than I had thought. The eyes were set further back, and they were the color of old copper. With a slit pupil, the skin was scaled, fine as suede. They looked at me. I am not sure what they were looking for. I stood with my manifest in my hand, and I held their eye, and after a moment they bowed their head. Very small, very precise, and pulled the hood back up and turned and wheeled the crate away. They did not pay me. I had not asked. The slip from the private hangar had said payment on delivery, and I trusted it. The Holcomb sat on the pad for an hour after they left. I made coffee. I cleaned the galley. I lay down in the bunk for the first time in 26 days, because the bay was empty now and I would not be sleeping next to a crate that wasn't there. I closed my eyes. The hum was gone. I did not notice it at first. I had grown used to it the way you grow used to the weight of a wedding ring, and a wedding ring you don't feel until somebody pulls it off your finger. I lay in the bunk and went to sleep and slept 10 hours. Longer than I had slept in years. And when I woke up, I made coffee and ate and went through my logbook and signed off the run and put a kettle on. And it was somewhere in the kettle's rising whistle that I heard the silence. I stood at the galley with the kettle in my hand and listened. There was nothing in my head. There was the kettle, the wind picking up outside, the soft tick of the cooling sublight in the cockpit, the small clatter of a loose hinge somewhere on the hull. There was the sound of an empty bay and an empty ship. There was no hum. I set the kettle down. I sat on the bunk. I waited. Nothing came back. I sat on the bunk for a long time. I do not remember thinking anything. When I finally moved, it was to put my face in my hands, and that was when I realized I was crying. I cried the way you cry at 67, which is mostly without sound, and I cried for a long time. I did not know what I was crying for. I thought vaguely that it must be Edda, that whatever piece of her my body had kept for 15 years had finally let go. I sat on the bunk in the Holcomb on a still landing pad on a small dry world, and I cried for a wife I had already buried 3 years ago. And the bay behind me was empty, and the hum was gone, and I did not understand any of it yet. The wind chimes started up outside. The envoy came to the hatch a week and a day later. By then I was back on the inner stretch of the loop between Varantor and the third anchorage, ferrying the usual mail and a load of welding rod and a sack of letters for the foreman at Threll. The bay was full of cargo I'd picked up at the Varantor General Dispatch on my way out. All of it ordinary. All of it loud with the slow hums of ordinary cargo coolers, and nothing else. The silence in my head had not lifted. I had stopped expecting it to. I had also in those 8 days begun to do something I had never done in my life. I had begun to hum the tune myself. I didn't decide to. The first morning out of Varantor, I caught myself humming it over the galley sink. I stopped. I looked at the sink. I shook my head and went back to washing the cup. By the second morning I was humming it again before I'd realized I'd started, and by the fourth I had given up trying to stop, because the silence in my head was a kind of cold I had not expected. I hummed it the way you hum any small thing you've carried a long time. It comforted me. I made my peace with it. I would carry it the way I now had to carry it, out loud by myself, and that would be the new arrangement. The envoy's knock was a soft 3 taps on the outside of the hatch. I was at the galley boiling water, and I heard them clearly. I was not expecting anyone. The loop's anchorages are small, and the lonely pad at the third anchorage is not a place where a man knocks on a docked barge in the middle of a calm afternoon. I opened the hatch. They were the same person who had taken the crate at Varantor. I knew them before I saw them. Or perhaps I knew them when I saw them, because the long jaw and the quiet hands were unmistakable. They stood at the foot of the ramp in a clean long coat the color of slate, and they had the hood down this time. Their face was bare to the daylight. It was a face that had a great deal of scale in it, fine and dark, and a long jaw and eyes the color of old copper. They were not human. I had taken a moment to be sure of that before, and I was sure of it now. Mr. Ashcraft, that's me. You are requested at the throne. I stood in the hatch with a kettle still steaming behind me on the galley plate. I am not a man who is requested at thrones. I am a man who hauls welding rod from one anchorage to another. I looked at the envoy, and I tried to think what to say. Whose throne? The throne of the Corinth Reach. I don't know what that is. They looked at me with great patience. They had the kind of stillness in their face that I had seen in monks and in good doctors, and in men who have spent long years on long quiet jobs. It is the seat of the Empress Viren. You are requested. The Holcomb will be you will not be detained. You will be returned here, or to any port of your choosing, when the visit is complete. If you refuse, you will not be pressed. If you accept, we will leave within the hour. I stood in the hatch for a long moment. I thought of Edda, foolishly, of what she would say. She had been a practical woman, but she had also been a curious one, and curious in a quiet way. She would have told me to go. She would have said, Moss, you have been listening to that hum for 15 years, and you have a chance to find out what it was. You do not get a chance like that twice. Go. Give me 10 minutes, I said. Take them. I went back to the galley and turned off the kettle and packed small bag, a change of shirt, a razor, my logbook, Edda's old reading glasses for no reason I could name, and I locked down the Holcomb's bay and pulled the cockpit harness and went out, and stood at the foot of the ramp with the envoy. They turned without speaking, and led me across the pad to a craft I had not seen land. It was a low, slender thing in the same slate as the envoy's coat, with no markings I could read. The hatch opened as we approached and folded shut behind us with no sound at all. Inside, the air smelled the way the private hangar on Marinville had smelled. Ozone and warm scale. The envoy sat in the chair across from mine and folded their long hands and did not speak. The craft lifted without my feeling it. After a moment I felt the soft pull of a jump, longer and deeper than any I had ever ridden through. I closed my eyes. I do not know how long we traveled. The envoy did not speak. I did not speak. When the craft set down, it was on a wide marble landing under a sky I had never seen, and I knew without being told that I was a great long way from the Draylen Loop. The throne hall of the Corinth Reach is not a hall the way I had imagined a hall. It is an enormous open colonnade, columns the height of a grain silo, white stone veined with gold, and the roof above is open to the sky for half its length, with light pouring down through it in a great honey-colored shaft that touches the floor at the dais. Daylight on every surface. The kind of bright that is not theatrical, only present, the way the sun is present at noon on a clean day. I stepped out of the craft and into that light, and I stopped for a moment because my eyes had to adjust. The envoy walked me down the colonnade. There were others there. Tall draconic figures in long coats. Longer dragons coiled along the column bases, watching us with the patience of things that have been watching a long time. Some had wings folded against their backs in long ridged sheaths. Some were horned, some were finely scaled, and some were ridged like old slate. None of them was human, and none of them was the smooth-skinned, pale humanoid royal a colony child draws when you ask them to draw a dragon prince. These were dragons. They were animals, and they were thinking beings at once, and the look they gave me, as I walked past, was the look of a creature that has weighed the air before you arrived and is now weighing you. I did not look at them. I looked at the floor. At the end of the colonnade was a dais of plain pale stone, 3 broad steps high. On the dais was the Empress. I will try to describe her honestly, because she deserves honesty. She was the size of a barge, larger in some directions. She was coiled on the dais the way an animal that is also a queen might coil. Long-bodied, deep-chested, 4-limbed with claws like brass-clad hooks, with a high-crested head and a long jaw and the same copper-colored eyes as the envoy but bigger and steadier and ancient. Her scale was a deep wet bronze that took the daylight and broke it into a kind of glow on the curve of her flank. Her wings were folded against her back and the joints stood higher than my head. There was no crown, there was no tunic. She was not pretending to be a person. She was an empress and she was a dragon, and the two were not separate things. Curled against her flank, against the warmth of her side, was a smaller dragon. Smaller, I mean, the way a child is smaller than a parent, but she was still longer than I am. Tall, and her wings were folded the same careful way her mother's were, and her scales were a young amber that had not yet darkened. The throat plates along her neck were iridescent, pearled like the inside of a shell, and they caught the daylight and shifted color as she breathed. She was watching me as I came down the colonnade. I knew her before I knew her. I knew her the way you know a voice on a telephone before you place it. I knew her the way I had known the hum in my head, by feel, by note, by the long quiet company of her over 15 years. She was the hum. I stopped at the foot of the dais. I do not remember what I did with my hands. I think I held them at my sides. I do not remember if my mouth was open. I remember only the daylight on the Empress's flank and the young amber dragon's eyes on mine, and the silence in the hall, which was so deep it had a texture to it. The Empress moved her head, slowly. Her great long neck curved down toward me until her eye was on a level with mine, and the eye was a copper-colored disc bigger than my own face, and the slit pupil widened in the daylight and steadied on me. Pilot Ashcraft. Her voice was not the voice on the comm. The comm voice had been smaller, an officer a relay. This voice was deep and broad and slow, and it moved in my chest the way a long bell moves in a chest, and I felt it in my teeth and in the bones behind my ears. That's me, I said. I do not know if she smiled. I do not know if dragons smile. Something in the long lines of her jaw shifted. You have carried something of mine, Pilot Ashcraft, for a long time. I would like to ask you about it. All right, the sound you carry in your head. Yes. Will you sing it for me? I had sung it twice in my life by then. Once into a comm channel for an unknown voice, and 26 times over the galley sink in the 8 days since the bay had gone quiet. I had never sung it to anyone who knew what it was. I sang it. I sang it standing on the pale stone floor of the throne hall of the Corinth, reach with the daylight pouring down through the open roof, and the Empress's eye 6 feet from my face, and I sang it the way you sing any small thing you've carried a long time. Quietly, without much breath, just the line of it, rising a half step and dipping back and holding the longer note and resolving down. 10 seconds end to end, the whole phrase. When I finished, the silence in the hall held for a long beat. Then the young dragon at the Empress's side lifted her head and sang it back to me. She sang it in her own voice, which was a young voice and a dragon's voice both. A soft thing with a vibration in it that ran from somewhere below. My hearing up into the human range and back down. She sang the phrase exactly. The half step up, the dip, the hold, the resolve. She sang it the way I had sung it, with the small ornament I'd put on the third note from carrying it so long. She sang it like she had learned it from me, which she had. When she finished, she lowered her head and looked at me with eyes the same copper as her mother's, and I understood. I understood it standing there. I understood it the way you understand any plain fact you have refused to look at for 15 years. The Empress watched me understand. When I was ready, she spoke again. I sang that phrase to her in the egg, Pilot Ashcraft, every night. For 3 full cycles I sang it to her before she hatched, and I sang it to her every day of her first half year. It is the song I made for her, it is hers. Yes, she was taken from me when she was 8 months out of the shell. There was a war. The war is finished now, and most of what was wrong has been put right. And I will not bore you with the politics of it. The part that matters is that she was taken, and she was held in a place I could not reach. And for 15 years she sang the song I had sung to her. In the dark, every night, she sang it as far and as wide as she could send it. She sang it asking to come home. Yes, I said. My voice was not steady. I am not embarrassed to tell you that. You were the only one quiet enough to hear her. I do not know what I did then. I think I sat down on the stone floor of the throne hall. I think the Empress let me. I sat with my hands on my knees, and I looked at the young dragon at the foot of the dais. And she looked back at me with her young copper eyes, and her iridescent throat plates lifting and falling with her breath. She had a small overbite at the front of her jaw. One of her wing joints sat slightly lower than the other. She was real. She was a person. She had been singing into the dark for 15 years, and I had heard her, and I had hummed her back without knowing I was doing it. And she had heard me, and we had kept each other company across a void I could not measure. The young dragon stood up from her place at her mother's flank. She came down the 3 steps of the dais one at a time. She walked across the pale stone to where I was sitting, and she lowered her long young head down to mine, very carefully, the way you lower a thing made of glass. She did not touch me with her claws. She touched me with the soft of her snout, just at the side of my face. The way a horse leans into a hand. I do not remember crying. I do remember that her scale was warm against my cheek, and that the iridescent plates of her throat moved softly as she breathed, and that her breath smelled like nothing I could name, like a kitchen with the windows open and a fire just damped. She held there for a long moment. Then she lifted her head and she hummed the song one more time, low in her throat, and I hummed it back, and the 2 notes met in the air between us and held, and the Empress watched us with her great copper eye, and the daylight came down through the open roof in its honey-colored shaft, and that was the moment, and there will not be another one like it in my life. I want to tell you what was said after. When the young dragon had walked back up the steps to her mother, and I had stood up off the stone floor, slowly, because at 67 you do not stand up quickly flying from a stone floor, the Empress lowered her head again and considered me. You have done a thing for me, Pilot Ashcraft. You did not know you were doing it. That does not change the thing. All right, I will repay you. Tell me how. I want to be honest with you about what I felt at that moment. I felt very tired, and very small, and very much an old cargo pilot in a borrowed shirt in a hall built for creatures the size of barges. I also felt a thing I did not have a name for, the soft warm cold feeling of having mattered to somebody without having tried to. It is not a feeling I am used to. It made my knees weak and my eyes prick again, and I waited until both had passed before I answered. I don't want much, ma'am. I do not know why I called her ma'am. It came out the way a thing comes out when you have been raised by a woman who taught you that you call everybody who outranks you ma'am or sir. The Empress did not laugh. I do not think she would have laughed. Something in her great old face softened, though, and she let the words stand. Tell me what you want. I'd like to keep my route. She held still. Your route. The Draylen loop. I run her in the hulk of my barge. I'd like to keep doing that. I'm 67 and I don't want a homestead I can't keep up. And I don't want a title I don't know how to wear. And I don't have any people left to leave money to. I have my route. I'd like to keep it. That is all. That's all, ma'am. The Empress was silent for a long time. The daylight moved on the floor a fraction. The young dragon watched us both. I had expected to give you more, Pilot Ashcraft. I know it. You will accept one thing. Ma'am, she moved her great head. From a fold in the bronze scale at her throat, the Empress wore no clothes, but she had a small pouch of her own scale, like a hidden pocket folded into her own hide, and from it she took a thing with the very tip of one claw. She lifted a small object and set it down. On the stone floor between us, it was a pin, bronze the size of a coin. The same coiled dragon sigil I had seen on the slip at Vorantor. Head turned in toward its own body, scaled, simple. That is a token of the reach, she said. It is small, it will not impress you. It does one thing. Any of my people anywhere, on any of my worlds, on any of my ships, in any of my ports will know it, show it. And you will not be delayed, and you will not be questioned, and you will not be touched. It does not give you authority, it gives you passage. You will not need it often. Perhaps you will never need it. I would like you to have it. Will you take it? I bent and picked it up. It was warm. I do not know if it had been warm before she took it from her scale pouch, or whether she warms everything she touched. I weighed it in my hand. It was no heavier than a loop manifest. I'll take it, ma'am. Pin it on the breast of your shirt. Pinned it on. The young dragon watched me. She had not been spoken about in this part of the conversation, and she had not spoken, but her copper eyes had been on the pin the whole time it was changing hands, and now they came back up to my face. Pilot Ashcraft. Yes, ma'am. Her name is Soreth Veer. She is my daughter. She will speak when she chooses. She does not choose often, yet she has not had practice. But she has heard your voice for 15 years, and she would like to say one thing to you before you go. I looked at Soreth Veer. She had come down from the dais again, in that careful, slow way, and she stopped a few feet from me. Her young head was at my height, or perhaps a little above. Her iridescent throat plates lifted and held. Thank you, she said. She said it in my own language. She said it with a small dragon's mouth not quite formed for the human shape of the word, and the th came out a little soft, and the k a little hard. She said it the way a child says a phrase they have practiced once and not yet practiced twice. She had picked the phrase. She had wanted that one. You're welcome, I said. She lowered her snout and pressed it once gently against the back of my hand. Then she turned and walked back up the steps to her mother and curled in beside her again. And the Empress put her great wingtip down over her daughter's back like a blanket, and that was the end of it. The envoy walked me out of the hall the way they had walked me in. I did not look at the dragons along the colonnade. I do not know how long my walk back to the craft took. I do not remember the jump back. I remember stepping out of the craft onto the pad at the third anchorage, and seeing the Holcomb sitting where I had left her, and the wind picking up over the dry ground, and a wind chime somewhere on the pad's edge that I had not noticed before. The envoy stood at the foot of the ramp with their hands folded. Pilot Ashcraft, yes, you have a route to run. I do. They bowed their head, the same small precise bow I had seen at Vorantor, and turned and walked back to the craft. And the craft lifted without my feeling it, and I stood on the pad alone with the bronze pin warm on the breast of my shirt and the wind in my hair, and the wind chime going on somewhere out of sight. I went up the ramp into the Holcomb. I made coffee. I sat in the cockpit chair. I sat for a long time. I will tell you about the route after then, because it is the part that matters most to me, and I think it is the part I want to leave you with. The loop did not change. The dispatch board updated on Tuesdays. The freight came in and went out. Petra at Marinvel logged my slips and gave me her flat, steady look when I came in. Olin at Threll gave me his bad coffee. The wind chime at Vorantor kept on with its small noises. The seasons on the four worlds did what seasons do, which is move along whether or not you are paying attention to them. I did not show the pin. I had thought, walking back up the ramp the first day, that I would never have a use for the bronze coin on my shirt. I had been right about that mostly. I kept the pin on the inside of the breast pocket of my pilot's coat, where it would not catch the eye of every dock hand and every freight inspector, and every customs officer on a slow Tuesday. Twice in the next year I took it out, once at a border check at the far edge of the loop where a young Corinth officer had stopped my barge for what he said was a routine sweep, and once at an anchorage that had been ringed by a Drecken blockade I had not known was coming. Both times the pin did exactly what the Empress had said it would do. The young officer's face changed, and he stepped back and waved me through, and the blockade opened a corridor for the Holcomb without anyone speaking to me at all, and I went on through, and I went on with my run, and I put the pin back into the inside pocket of my coat and forgot about it again. The pin is a small thing. It is not the part I want to tell you about. The part I want to tell you about is the silence. The silence in my head after Vorontor did not lift. I had thought, walking back to the Holcomb that day on the pale stone of the third anchorage, that it might. I had thought, without quite admitting it to myself, that perhaps, now that I had met the source of the hum and shaken its hand, the hum would come back. Perhaps it had been waiting for permission. Perhaps Sorethvire would hum it again into the dark across the void, just to keep me company, and I would lie down in my bunk and hear it again, and have my long, quiet companion back. She did not, I understand it. She had been singing into the dark for 15 years because she was alone. She was not alone anymore. She had her mother and her Empress, and her great wingtip blanket, and the warm side of the dragon she had been singing toward, for half her life, and there was no reason for her to keep singing into the void, and she did not. That is right, that is as it should be. I would not have wanted her to. I am not the sort of man who would have asked a child to keep singing into the dark to keep me company. But the silence in my head was real. The bunk was loud with it on bad nights. I had been a man who slept with company for 15 years without knowing it, and I now had to learn to sleep alone in my own head. And at 67 that is harder than it sounds. I hummed the song to myself. I do not know if you have ever hummed a song that was given to you by a dragon. I had not before that year. It is a different feeling than humming a song you have written, or a song you have heard on the radio. It is a song that was made for somebody else, and that you have been asked in a very quiet way to carry. I hummed it over the galley sink in the mornings. I hummed it in the cockpit on the long stretches between anchorages. I hummed it when I was washing up at night. I hummed it standing on the pad at Vorontor, with my hand on the Holcomb's hull, looking out over the dry ground at the wind chime. I hummed it as a man hums a song that belongs to a friend, when the friend is not in the room. After a while, the silence in my head stopped being a cold thing. It became a quiet room. Edda used to say there was a difference between an empty house and a quiet one, and I did not understand what she meant until that year. The silence in my head was a quiet room now. The hum had been the lamp on and the lamp was off, but the room was still mine and the room was warm, and I could sit in it with my own company and not be alone in it. I learned to live with the song instead of inside it. Olin at Threll asked me once, on a winter run, why I was humming all the time these days. He looked at me across the bay with his bad coffee in his hand and his foreman's clipboard under his arm. You weren't a humming man before, Moss. I know it. What changed? I thought about it. I had been keeping the story to myself, mostly. Not because I had been told to. The Empress had not asked me to keep her daughter's name out of the loop, but because the story did not belong to me alone. It belonged to a young dragon who had sung into the dark for 15 years, and to an Empress who had waited for her, and to me only in the part where I had been quiet enough to hear. It was not my story to spend at every freight counter. I looked at Olin. I heard a song, I said. He nodded, he didn't push. Good one? It's a good one. Good, he said, and signed off on the load and went back inside. I have told the story now to 2 people. Olin got the short version that night, and you have just gotten the long one, and that is enough. I am 68 as I tell it. The Holcomb has needed a new coolant pump, and the autopilot has been complaining about the third anchorage's beacon, and Petra at Marinville has been threatening to retire for 2 years, and has not yet done it. The loop is what it has been for 9 years, and what I expect it to be, for as long as hands hold steady on the cockpit controls. I have not seen Sorethvire again. I do not expect to. She is a princess of the Corinth Reach, and I am a cargo pilot at the rim of a long, quiet route. And our paths crossed for the length of one humming, and that was a great deal more than my life had any right to ask for. But last spring, on a slow run between Threll and the second anchorage, I came back to the galley to find a paper note tucked under my coffee mug. I did not know who had put it there. The bay had been locked for 3 days. The cockpit had been locked for 2. The note was on plain ivory paper with no markings and no seal, and the handwriting on it was a tight, careful young hand, the way a child writes who has been practicing. It said, "Pilot, the song is still mine, but it is also yours. Sing it," that was all. I sat at the galley with the note in my hand, and I read it 3 times, and I folded it and put it in the inside pocket of my coat next to the bronze. Pin, and I made my coffee and went back to the cockpit and started the next leg of the loop. And I hummed the song the whole way through. I have not stopped humming it. It is a small thing, the song. It is a half step up and a dip and a held note and a resolve down. 10 seconds end to end. It is not the kind of song they put on the colony radio, and it is not the kind of song anyone has ever asked me about. It is a song an Empress made for her daughter in the egg, and the daughter sang it into the dark for 15 years asking to come home. And a 67-year-old cargo pilot in a barge called the Holcomb heard it the whole time without knowing what he was hearing. I am not sure what to make of that. I am not sure that any of us are meant to make anything of it. I have stopped trying. I have my route. I have my barge. I have a bronze pin in the inside pocket of my coat and a small ivory note next to it and the memory of a young dragon's snout pressed against the back of my hand. I have a song in my head that is mine to sing now, and a quiet room behind my eyes where the song used to live. And the loop goes on, 41 days end to end, 4 worlds and 11 outposts and 3 anchorages. And the wind chime at Vorontor keeps on with its small noises. And the kettle whistles in the galley in the mornings, and I drink my coffee, and I hum. Good company while it lasted. I sing it back to her sometimes, into the dark on the long stretches, the way she sang it to me. I do not know if she hears. I hope she does.